You are watching Unlocking the Vault on Mtgo Academy, featuring Enderfall.
Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to this deck tech for a Metalworker Forge Master deck that I played in last night's daily event. I had some technical difficulties with my recording equipment, and unfortunately the all but one round failed to save. So I have to go back and I'm going to go back and record the matches through the replays, which is a little less than ideal, but sometimes those types of things happen. But first I wanted to outline the deck and why I chose to play it. So looking at the vintage format, coming from Classic, I really didn't have a great grasp of what works and what doesn't work very well. I mean, obviously the decks are powerful. You're playing a lot of the spells one or two turns sooner than what you would normally see in Classic, and of course there's also a lot of different spells that just don't work very well at all in Classic and are absolutely fantastic in Vintage, and vice versa. So I was looking at deck lists, and there was a bunch of blue decks, and I've been trying out some of the blue decks in the practice room, but the reality was that there were so many different decisions to be made in the blue decks in Vintage that were never apparent in Classic, and I realized I was making a ton of mistakes, and mostly they were revolved around when to play a spell and when not to play a spell. So in lining up for playing the daily event this weekend, I didn't feel comfortable playing a blue deck. In fact, the first round I tried to play a combo deck, or the first DE on Sunday, I did try to play a combo deck, and it was an unmitigated disaster. Needless to say, I just didn't really have the necessary experience in order for the deck to work. There were a couple games I won based on just the sheer powerfulness of the deck, but when it came down to the games where I didn't have the oops, I win kind of situation, I found that I was not making the right decisions, and I ultimately scrubbed out of that. So when I wanted to play a deck in the second daily event, I wanted one that I had a little bit more experience with, something I felt a little bit more comfortable playing. And going back to my roots in Classic, which is where I originally started out with, was workshop decks. So I figured I would take a look at some of the workshop decks. I took in between the two events, I played a couple of practice rounds. The deck seemed strong. I thought it might be a good contender. I thought I might have I wanted to try out the Metalworker and Codolph Forge Master combination. This is more of a combo deck than it is a lockdown deck, but it's something that has been performing fairly well in Vintage lately from what I've been able to gather in reading tournament reports and looking at deck lists. So I wanted to give it a shot. So the name of the game here is basically revolves around getting Metalworker out on turn 1 or turn 2, preferably turn 1, and then powering into a bunch of much larger spells. And the other aspect is called the Forge Master, which is sort of like a tinker type card on legs. It allows you to search out one artifact out of your library at the cost of sacrificing 3. So it doesn't cost mana to activate, but instead of sacrificing just a single artifact, you have to sacrifice 3 to get the ability. But it is reusable if you don't sacrifice the Codolph Forge Master itself. So there's quite a bit of value that can be gained out of it. But some of basically the targets that you want are going to be some of these 6-drop spells. Duplicant is obviously kind of a silver bullet against, say, an Oath deck or some other type of problematic creature. Steel Hellkite is kind of a catch-all where you can just kind of fly over everything and win the game, and it has a nice little Pernicious Deed-like effect if it does attacking is unblocked, where it can wipe out multiple artifacts. Well, not artifacts, I should say, but multiple permanents that have the same mana cost. And there's also Wormcoil Engine, so if you're low on life, this guy's great to block with. And one of the beautiful things about Forge Master is you can activate it at instant speed. So if your opponent is attacking and they think that, well, they have a pretty, a good likelihood of winning the game on sort of like an alpha strike, you can search out the Wormcoil Engine, drop it out there, get some preferable blocks, and gain a bunch of life. And then there's also, against all of the non-artifact decks, Sundering Titan is a great way to kind of one-sided Armageddon them a little bit. Early in the game, say like in turn 3 or 4, you can wipe out 2 or 3 lands, which is really nice. Gives you a really good tempo swing. But even late game, you can kind of lock them out of certain land colors if you can knock off some specific dual lands. Outside of that, the deck has sort of a typical workshop-like package. The lock pieces here are 4 Chalice of the Void, 3 Thorn of Amethysts, and 2 Revokers, as well as a set of Tangle Wires and a Trinisphere. You'll notice that there's 0 Sphere of Resistances in here, and there's only 3 Thorns instead of 4. I'll discuss that a little bit later, as whether or not I think that's a great plan or not. But the rest of the deck kind of, and there's also the 4 Lodestone Golems as well. So this is kind of the lock pieces. Another silver bullet you can search out for with Forge Master is a Metamorph, so you can copy one of your own guys, or if your opponent has like Grizzlebrand or something along those lines, you can search up a Metamorph and potentially trade with their Grizzlebrand. There's a pair of Lightning Greaves in this deck, which are kind of handy, where you can get some interesting turns where you can potentially play Metalworker and Lightning Greaves on the same turn, giving Metalworker haste, which in turn gives you the ability to drop some more artifacts onto the battlefield and kind of really go off on turn 1. So there's some upside with that as well. The original deck list I pulled off the internet had a single Blightsteel Colossus. Obviously, putting Lightning Greaves on a Blightsteel Colossus is really handy, especially if you search it up with a Koldoth Forge Master. But I didn't particularly like that, in the sense that if you draw the Blightsteel Colossus, there's no way to really get it out of your hand, and unless the game goes really long, say turns 6, 7, and 8, hard casting it is not really easy in this type of a deck. I mean, you can get it done obviously with a Metalworker fairly early, but I just thought the original deck did not have a Metamorph. I thought Metamorph was a little bit better of a silver bullet if you do manage to have to draw it in your opening hand, or in the first 1 or 2 turns. You can actually reasonably play this. You can't really reasonably expect to play the Blightsteel Colossus without a lot of help in the first couple of turns. So maybe the Blightsteel Colossus is a little bit better as sort of an oops, I win, but I thought the Metamorph had a little bit more value. And the last card outside of the mana base that I want to talk about is Staff of Domination. That is sort of an insta-win with Metalworker. If you have 3 artifacts in hand, you can basically set up an infinite loop where you can draw your deck in a million life, and basically win the game on the spot there. So, because you can get Lightning Greaves and just play all of your creatures, put them out there, and alpha strike. So that's the reason why it's in here as a one of. It is sort of kind of a oops, I win. And there were a couple games where it actually worked out, where I just drew a card off of it without Metalworker in play. So it has some value. The mana base is pretty straightforward. 18 lands, 4 tombs, 1 city traders, 4 wasteland, 4 workshop, strip mine, Tolarian Academy. And this deck also has 3 Cavernous Souls to take advantage of the fact that Metalworker and called the Forge Master are constructs. And then after that, you can, if you draw it in the mid to late game, you can use Cavern of Souls to name Lodestone Golem, Worm, or say Dragon, in order to play some further uncounterable creatures. Interestingly enough, Sunray Titan is a golem itself, so you can play those off of Cavern of Souls. Going to the sideboard real quick. This deck sideboard was somewhat interesting. I don't know if this was exactly the way I would play it in the future, but you basically have Crucible of Worlds against in the mirror match. Oops. Relic should go with the Grafdigger's Cage. Your anti-dredge hate is 2 relics and 4 Grafdigger's Cages. Against Oath, you've got Grafdigger's Cage in duplicate. Against some of the other creature decks, as well as the mirror match, you've got a trio of Dismembers. And also, kind of for the mirror match, Steel Hellkite and Wormcoil Engine give you much more reach. Crucible of Worlds is great in the mirror match. Obviously, it gives you an advantage to potentially lock your opponent out of the game. It can be useful in other matchups, especially those that have a bunch of wasteland effects. But I think I would want to have at least one in the main deck, because it's kind of such an oops I win type of a card if you can cast it on turn 1 or turn 2. But the sideboard isn't necessarily geared, I think, to the type of metagame that we're seeing. There's a lot of blue decks running around, especially creature Delver type decks, Delver and Merfolk type decks. Steel Hellkite is good against Merfolk. Even Wormcoil Engine is decent. Dismember is okay. I think I'd much rather have this to be a Serrated Arrows or a Triskelion or something, but Dismember's not too bad. You can also bring that in the mirror match. There's a bunch of things that you want to bring out in the mirror match. You want to bring out things like Thorn of Amethyst, Chalice of the Void, Trinisphere, there it is, and potentially a couple other things, because they just have almost no value in it. So let's get on to the matches.